Cosmic Dispatch, a show about bodies, celestial bodies and earthbound bodies, time, experience, and the relationship between all of them. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue. And hey, everybody, how's it going? It is an absolutely beautiful day here in Kingston, New York. I hope some of you have been able to get out there and enjoy it. I feel like it's kind of a rarity now to look up into the sky and see like blue sky, sunshine, and it's kind of dry. It just feels kind of like a normal summer day, and I feel like also this is a time when normal feels weird, at least for me anyway. Um, Hope everybody either found some peace last week or took a bold action, or maybe you made a meaningful baby step in a long journey. There were many things to choose from in last week's astrology, and this week we narrow our focus and also let some of the things that were initiated last week play out. As of yesterday, the sun moved into Leo, and we are now officially in Leo season, the season of the big cat, actually, season of all cats. Leo season 2023 is going to be a very special one. Kind of reminds me of um, the old 80s and 90s sitcoms when they'd announce, and now on a very special Family Ties or what have you. And right away you knew there was going to be some darker subject matter, and that's what we have going on in this very special Leo season 2023. Astrologer and mythologist and theater artist Nate Speare will be joining me in a little bit to talk about this season, as will Renee Sills of Embodied Astrology. And one of the key features of this season, and it's a big one, is Venus's station retrograde in the sign of Leo. We'll also be covering this week's astro-weather for the week. But before we check in with the astro-weather, just want to remind you that if you would like to have a question answered on the air, you can email us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com. And you can stay up to date with all of our content on Instagram. And please subscribe to the Cosmic Dispatch on YouTube. Okay, so this Leo season is really, it's one for the books. Not only does Venus station retrograde in Leo on the same day that the sun enters, but as the sun and Venus move through the sign, they make multiple connections to Jupiter and Uranus while there. And this actually continues into Virgo and Libra season. When Venus backtracks through a sign, it's like it's already in a moving violation of its trademark balance, grace, and consensus. And contacts with Jupiter and Uranus just add indulgence, audacity, and rebellion. It's kind of like, Venus gone rogue or Venus gone wild. And having the sun and a wild Venus in the same sign for the duration of the season doubles down on the classic ardor, artistic zeal, and playfulness of Leo, but with a wanton twist. Lots of astrologers have predicted a very sexually amped up summer, and that is one possible expression, but there are many others. For instance, I'm sensing that in addition to hot sex summer, we're also in for hot labor summer. Venus retrograde brings out the spirit of Leo's opposite sign, which is Aquarius. And so Leo represents leaders, centrality, and consistency, and Aquarius would represent things like the masses, decentralization, and aberration. If we consider governmental structures and other institutions as extensions of our families of origin, with a head of household who calls the shots, and we, the children, as obedient underlings, it would stand to reason that we have not yet grown up. One of the first signs that we are starting to grow up is expressing disagreement with leaders, authority figures, and anyone who puts their individual worth above the collective. This Venus retrograde in Leo, doing its best impression of Aquarius, is an excellent role model for addressing these things and an excellent role model for change. While retrograde, Venus is less concerned about consensus and more interested in creating what it needs and expressing desires regardless of external approval. It's less concerned about being thought of as pretty and more interested in defining for itself what beauty is. And instead of charming and placating in the name of winning favor, it's more willing to do battle. Now, let's not forget that the Romans considered Venus a goddess of war and victory as well as love. This Leo season is also sure to bring back old flames, and I'm not just talking about romantic old flames. I'm talking about like ideological old flames, artistic flames. Um, you know what artistic projects or ideas or longings or stirrings have we like kept in a little box and not addressed for a while? Those are going to be calling out to be expressed along with any other like buried embers. And then with the influence of Uranus coming up, I'm thinking of like surprising things, wild sparks that may turn into a full on fire. Venus's strong influence over the season wants us to reconnect with our desires and actually feast on them, gorge ourselves on them. It wants us to investigate the reasons why we comply with things that we're kind of ambivalent about. Like why why might we fear our own passion? What keeps us from being wholehearted? Venus and Leo are both about matters of the heart. And as we all know, the heart wants what the heart wants. And instead of disparaging that, like I hear so many times, it's like, oh, my passion, my heart, that's going to get me in trouble. I need to get that in check. I can't really listen to that. Let's be logical, let's be rational. um well, at least for this, stretch, these 40 days and 40 nights of Venus retrograde, we should celebrate that. um we should follow the heart, as corny and trite as that sounds, follow your heart. That's kind of what we're being asked to do here. Alrighty. So I've said my piece about Leo season. I would now like to welcome Nate Speare, who has just joined us to help me out with this week's astro-weather, Venus retrograde deep dive, and a welcoming of Leo season. Hi, Nate. How you doing?
Hi, Cory. Thanks for bringing me on again. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm pretty good. Um, yeah, already I feel like some things are popping for me, even though we just had the station of Venus yesterday. I've been feeling this coming, and I don't know, how about you?
Yeah, it's funny. Me too. As Venus was stationing yesterday, I was walking with someone who was carrying a pink lunchbox. And of course, someone else outside in the city asked, "Oh, did you guys just go see the Barbie movie?" And we both laughed because it's like this pop culture, expression, pop culture trying to talk about Venus.
Totally. I saw the Barbie movie last night, and I went to a drive-in, and like people at a drive-in, everyone was wearing their pink t-shirts and their pink accessories and like hot pink sneakers. And yeah, I just thought it was funny. And then, I saw the movie and yeah, like I could see, yeah, Venus retrograde all over that. But
Right.
oh,
Yeah. Not trying to give that any more PR, but
right.
than it already has, but nonetheless, as bringing it to astrology and to the archetypal eye and the symbolic eye, I always find it interesting to look at what culture is trying to talk about, you know? So it's like, oh, okay, culture is trying to talk about Venus right now in the way that it knows how. And what can we say about that? What insight can we bring to bear at a deeper level, or at the sort of other way that as astrologers we're taught to look at things?
Yeah, you know what? I just had like an idea for an astrological like film criticism podcast, but that
Right.
will have to be, yeah, for another day. So
Yeah.
Nate, before we continue, for those who aren't familiar with you, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about what you do.
Sure. My name is Nate Speare. I go under the moniker Weird Astro Body, which is my practice, my sort of public presence, and my also my private consulting practice. And I help people weave their fate and catalyze and create openings for people to weave their fate in creative ways, which includes being able to, on an embodied level and also on the level of deep imagination, come into their weirdness, their eccentricity, their sense of wildness, which also creates a pathway toward creating and shaping the weird, WYRD, which is the old English term for personal destiny, or the turning and weaving of personal destiny. So I'm into some kind of weird stuff. No, that's what my work is about. And there's a strong component of creative voice and self-expression, and also of shadow work as well, of going into the dark spaces and into the sort of murky underworld and unconscious spaces sometimes. And a lot of times people come to know me, or come to find out about me through the threads of my work in the sort of self development worlds of erotic work, pleasure work, and shadow work, and work on ancestry and ancestral patterns. So these are kind of like topical threads that astrology becomes a doorway, an opening to these tributaries of personal destiny weaving. So that's a good start.
Yeah, and all very Venus retrograde in, my opinion.
Yeah.
So we are going to actually save, this whole Venus retrograde coverage in Leo season for when Renee gets here. Would you like to, and I've already asked you, so I know I'm asking you now. Would you like to help me with this week's astro weather?
I'd love to.
Okay, we'll jump in and then we'll hit the thing that everyone really wants to talk about in a
Yeah.
little bit. But for starters, today, July 23rd, we have Chiron stationing retrograde, and we also have Mercury squaring Uranus. I'm
Right.
wondering, you have any thoughts on those two things off the top of your head?
Yeah. Well, fragmented at first insights about those maybe, but I'm sure the connection will manifest. Well, Chiron retrograde in Aries, it 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 comes back to, I'm thinking in the bigger picture, it comes back to the sun in certain ways, the sun, the solar principle, the our seat of vital force and creativity and self-expression. Because for our listeners, there's this kind of complicated idea in astrology around called dispositors, which is like the kind of part of the way that different planets talk to each other. So it's very simply, you can imagine like these planets ping ponging back and forth these different energies, and often you'll find that it goes back to one planet that is behind the curtain, sort of pulling the strings at that moment, or that is actually the choreographer of what's happening. So I think of Chiron in Aries, and then I go back to Mars in Virgo, and then I go to Mercury in Leo, and it brings me back to today, right? The sun. Not now we're into Leo season, the sun in Leo, and we stop there because the sun is at home in Leo. It's not necessary to understand the technicalities of that, but what I think about Chiron and Aries overall is about the journey of Aries proclaims I am, this sense of individuality and beingness and identity, without having all this baggage around identity, sort of being able to travel light and proclaim the self, proclaim selfhood. And then this, going back to the sun in Leo, it's all very wrapped up with the fire element. So this pulse of creativity and vital force. So that's all to say that I think that Chiron retrograde is an opportunity to review and reflect on creative wounds, and Chiron brings us back to the wound, and the wound and the gift are very closely interrelated. I was just seeing today a post from Michael Meade, the storyteller and mythologist Michael Meade, about how the genius and the wound are, the genius is always behind the wound. That's this sort of old mythological idea that behind the wound there's the genius, and behind the genius there's the wound, the woundedness. And that one of the greatest wounds is to not know what our place in the world is, or a sense of who we are in the world. So I thought it was very timely to see that quote on the day when Chiron's stationing retrograde, because it's this ripe time to reflect on. It feels like this is always the case to a certain degree these days, but a time to reflect on who am I, what's my place here, and behind where I'm feeling wounded and sort of like I'm limping creatively, where's actually the genius behind that? There's a cognitive reframe that's possible if I look deeper. There's another way to spin that becomes that can become a pathway toward my creativity, and that can be actualized right now in this moment. So what do you think? I just talked a lot. Yeah.
I was gonna say, wow, that was your fragmented take on it. No, that was
Yeah.
beautiful. Basically, all of what you said, and um, pinging off of that, I think it's really interesting that Chiron just stationed retrograde right as the north node of the moon has moved into Aries as well, further, amplifying this where, okay, how how do I experience just my simple existence and being? And then as far as where in the world do I fit, that becomes, I think everyone's having a big problem with that because the environment is changing very quickly and very radically, and so it's hard to feel that satisfying fit. And so we have to come at this whole individuality thing in a really fresh new way, because it's not just about, oh, finding my tribe or finding my calling. It's a lot more complex than that now. And I also think it's interesting, that so there's this Aries piece going on, and yes, we are in Leo season where the sun is exalted. So it's really, it's we're like it's begging us to to have a different way of relating to who we are, and a different way of like framing our experience. It's even hard to talk about because it's such a new thing, which is again an Aries thing, which makes it also applicable to Leo. And be and also another thing, interesting thing that's happening, we have the North Node at in Aries at 29 degrees. um, this is also pinging in this moment we had an eclipse on April 20th in Aries at 29 degrees. And so I feel like a lot of that's these questions around selfhood and selfness are not just coming to the fore, they might even be like very trenchant right now. And it's like
Yes.
I need to find my edges, or I need to find the me in all of this relationship stuff.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, because Chiron will also bring to focus where we have felt outcast or marginalized, which is a really important part of ourselves and our existence to give love to. I feel. I mean, I think about this in the context of there's a lot of talk today about, rightfully so, about finding our sort of ecological niche as a species and as individual beings as well. And I think that's all really good, and I also talk about that. But I think it's important to know that it's important to give attention to that aspect of ourselves that doesn't know where its niche is, or whether that's ecological niche or social niche or whatever we might be talking about there, that doesn't know where its place is, because there's really just that's so much of where the wound comes, that wound that just won't stop bleeding is like, I don't know where, where am I? It's like I'm seeing the world for the first time over and over again, especially in the ever shifting world today as you're describing. So yeah, I think it's important to hold that with the fiery, that sort of power of fire that Aries, and the sun and Leo bring to us, as far as like, yes, I might feel that I feel in contact with this other within that's like crying like a desperate baby and that doesn't know where it belongs. And yet I know that I know that it will prevail, and it will create, and it will co-create, even if it doesn't know it right now. So
Oh, that was beautiful. In trying to cover this week's astro weather, we got to we got to the Chiron station retrograde that is happening today, but also what's happening today is Mercury in Leo is squaring Uranus in Taurus. And yeah, fairly fairly quickly. Um yeah, any thoughts about that?
well, the I think of the square as, the square is the angle of challenge and the angle of manifestation, right? There's the image of a car crashing into a wall, which is sort of the challenge of the square, right? Then there's also the image of the wall and the ceiling, which is also a 90-degree angle, you could say, but or also a, it's an architectural, that's the architectural support side of the square. So I think of the square as an invitation into, and I frame it this way for clients: a square is an invitation into a labor of love. And I'm sure we'll get more into this as we go into the Venus segment, but so I think Mercury square Uranus is, it's this invitation to an effortful, to invitation into right effort, as far as how we are communicating our ideals and our visions of the future, our innovations, our experiments, and also how we communicate with ourselves and our passions. I think that Mercury and Venus have, just kind of like tying it into what we're going to talk about in a minute with Venus, is Mercury is the function of connecting, making connections, and Venus is the function of more deeply relating. And so the communications that we notice happening mentally, cognitively right now, the cognitive companions that we're carrying with us, I think can be good clues as kind of as we journey into this Venus retrograde, around that journey from connecting to relating. Um,
Hmm.
and what invitations into an effort that we can relish and love, the effort that we can relish, it's key to relish that effort. So Yeah, that's a good starting. Mercury square Uranus. What do you think?
Well, yeah, piggybacking off of that, um, and also, so now we brought in, Mercury's going to conjoin Venus on the 27th, and today Mercury's squaring Uranus. It's almost like I'm seeing the experience of Mercury as kind of being challenged, or as Uranus does, like blown open. There's something, a communication or a thought can blow a mental construct open so that by the time Mercury conjoins Venus, it can do that relating a little easier. I mean, because, you know, when when we're trying to actually relate with people, if if we don't have parts of us that are porous and cracked open, we we have like these two closed objects. They're in relation to each other, but they're not enough opening has been, you know I don't know, there hasn't been like a puncture so that people can really enter into relationship. And so
Yeah.
I can see, like, maybe between today and the 27th, um there might be like some new ideas or some new thoughts that instigate a meeting, and like a meeting of minds, or just stimulating some kind of conversation that pulls things together by the end of the week.
Yeah. And it's important to kind of look for this, to feel sensitively into this, because sometimes with these short-term transits, maybe you find this too, that or not, that they can feel sort of, they can manifest in very small clues, like, oh, my internet's not working, or classic, that happened to me as I was sort of signing on to join this uh with you today, is wait a second, why am I getting the dreaded spinning colored wheel on my computer and stuff, and all these kind of, and I thought, oh, this is perfect for Mercury square Uranus. There's that electricity, communications, connections, and creating this mini illusion of a crisis, right? And
Mm.
sometimes squares, the square aspect, can create this mini illusion of a crisis, but that's actually an invitation into what kind of invitation is that into the labor of love, or the right effort. So
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
And then, on the 28th, we have another Mercury event. Right after Mercury makes that conjunction with Venus, it moves into one of its home signs, Virgo.
yeah,
Um, ha- yeah, I like this. I like Mercury in Virgo.
yeah, yeah. Why do you like Mercury in Virgo? I'm curious. Yeah.
Well, for me, someone who has, a natal Mercury in Aries, um, I can come up with the ideas like quick and fast, like all the time. But it's nice to have, I feel like Mercury is the arbiter of like the quality of those ideas. And it's like, okay, all of these are great. um, which one of these ideas or communications has a shot at landing and grounding somewhere? Like, what can we actually use from, you know, all this like pile of information? We're gonna clean this up and get clear.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's
Virgo has an unsung charisma. I maintain this. Virgo has an
yeah.
unsung
Tell me about
charisma,
this.
because Leo is usually associated with charisma and star power and magnetism and all those things, right? But Virgo has an unsung charisma in my experience, which is the charisma of being able to hold multiple perspectives very masterfully, and being able to transmit and disseminate those perspectives with this careful mindfulness and precision, almost like acupuncture points to the transmitting wisdom like acupuncture points to the people whom they're serving. So I think we could keep this in mind. For it's like when someone with a lot of Virgo energy is in contact with the bigger quest or the deeper quest for higher knowledge, for personal gnosis and things like that, and is not overly caught up in the more persnickety aspect of Virgo, of being obsessed with classifications and no, a tomato is a fruit, and stopping there sort of thing, that when they're in contact with that deeper or higher quest, then they can have Virgo can be the charisma of the master pedagogue or ceremonialist or things like that. So I always like to remind that, or invite into this perspective of that Virgo has an unsung charisma as well. And Mercury going into Virgo on the 28th can sort of be, Mercury square Uranus today can be uncomfortable for fixed signs because that it is in fixed signs, and that has the biggest potential for stagnation or just wanting things to stay in a particular formation. So if we can get into this perspective, this is also part of the Uranus and Taurus journey, right? That the earth needs to be shaken up, the earth needs to be loosened. And Mercury's entrance into Virgo, if we go through this week knowing that our earth can be loosened, then Mercury and Virgo will have more facility being able to hold these multiple facets of our earth selves, and we'll be able to hold those perspectives, and including compassionately holding different parts of ourselves and areas of our lives, and have that charisma and magnetism at the same time. So
That's interesting. So yeah, because Virgo gets gets sold short sometimes on the charisma bit, but I know a lot of Virgos who, of course, they exhibit all of the stereotypical um helpfulness and being very adroit at things, and but they're also like they can be quite charming, but they use that charm in a different way than Leo would. Um, and yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think, there's a lot of unsung Virgos out there who are going to appreciate that. Um,
yes. Some of my idols throughout my life have been Virgos. So just to name that, this is like through the experience of observing, wait a minute, Virgo is actually can be really charismatic. So yeah.
so well, there you have it's looks like you mostly again, I feel like we just recently had another week where it was all about Mercury's experiences and communications, and it looks like this is another week that's going to happen. And because Mercury is is in Leo until the end of the week, and it's having contact with Venus, that brings us into the heart of what we came here to talk about today. The sun entered Leo yesterday, and we are officially in Leo season. Um, Nate, what is your relationship to the sign of Leo, or what are some of the most interesting things for you about this sign?
I like the way the astrologer Daniel Giamario talks about this sign, all of the signs, but the fixed signs, Leo as being fixed fire, as being the self-interest signs, not in the sense of greedy necessarily or selfish, but literally being interested in the self, of the experience of I'm here as an incarnate corporeal being, and I'm here to experience the fullness of what that means for its own sake, not because it has to be in service to something necessarily, but just the experience of that, and sharing that. You can share that experience with others. But to me, yeah, the way I relate with Leo is really around creative self-expression. I think of the alchemical images of the lion and the sort of maturation of the lion as going from this kind of insatiable greed for creativity, and also and then sort of taming that strong creative appetite, and knowing how to harness its, whatever term you want to use, its vital force energy, its chi, it's different things like that, um, and its expression of that vitality in the world. Um, so that's the sort of key. That's my keying into Leo. It's the experience of seeing and being seen,
Mm-hmm.
and what is needed for that to happen, and what kind of training on the part of the Leo, training in terms of life experience, not necessarily formal schooling, but
Yeah.
how does a Leo step into that place of being able to be seen in a way that is attuned to the now.
Mm, that's beautiful. Thank you, Nate. And Renee Sills just joined us. Hello, Renee.
Hi, Renee.
Hi there. I'm sorry to be late. I was having tech trouble.
So was Nate.
I was too. Yeah.
Retrograde.
And we were just talking. We were doing the weather for the week, and today Mercury is squaring Uranus, and so we were like, "Oh, okay, that seems about right." Well, thank you for joining us, Renee. I know you're super busy, and I've really enjoyed your work for like I think the past 4 or 5 years, and I've always meant to talk to you, and so like I'm just glad you're here. For those of you who aren't familiar with Renee, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. Hi. I'm Renee. I'm Renee Sills. Um, I started a project called Embodied Astrology in 2014. It is the synthesis and experimentation space for me to bring together my background as a somatic practitioner and body worker, movement teacher, and lifelong astrology student. I'm a second generation astrologer, as well as an arts background. I've studied, I have 2 degrees in contemporary art. And so I have 4 placements in Sag, including Uranus in Sag, trine my sun. And I'm a person that's like, how does everything go together? Because I feel like everything's talking to each other at the same time. So my practice with astrology feels like a synthesis of embodiment and kind of creative performative craft.
Wow. Yeah, wonderful. And if you haven't checked out Embodied Astrology's content, I really encourage you to do so. There's just there's so many amazing things going on, like all over your site. Venus has been in Leo since June 5th. It stationed retrograde yesterday. It goes direct September 3rd and finally leaves Leo for Virgo on October 8th. That's a lot of Venus in Leo. Um, do either of you have specific practices that you're recommending for this retrograde? And let's start with you, Renee, since you just jumped on.
Yeah, well, I actually just left another Zoom where I was taking part of the first of a 4-part workshop series on self-portraiture with astrology.
Oh, wow.
This is a series being hosted by Embodied Astrology, and the facilitator is Gabs Tossi, who is a trans artist and photographer. And, um, I feel like Venus retrograde cycles for me are always an opportunity to clarify and um, disentangle the parts of me that have been obscured by narratives and inner beliefs and trauma or residue of experiences that keep me from kind of the authentic essence of love. And I think the authentic essence of love has to include self love and self valuation. So, any practices that can help heal the ways that we might see or sense or feel or think about ourselves um, through a mutated gaze, like through a gaze that comes from external sources that might not see us accurately, or the ways that we project ourselves into comparison with societal or cultural ideals, which are often very limited. And yeah, I think self-portraiture is a great way, great practice to kind of reflect on oneself and how one wants to feel represented and presented.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. That's really powerful. I feel so often that when we're either with another person or in any just situation, we don't accurately we don't accurately get a sense of who we are when we think we're getting something mirrored back to us. A lot of the times it's we're we're seeing what we imagine someone else is seeing and then take that as, some kind of information about who we are. And so, yeah, that's super interesting. And also I just felt that I'm a 29-degree Leo rising. So I'm like this is really really here for me now. And that sounds amazing. How about you, Nate?
Oh, I love all of that. I love all of that, Renee. Yeah, this is something that I am sort of talking about in general these days in my practice. But I think Venus retrograde in Leo, especially, is a good opportunity to practice asking to be seen in ways that you want to be seen. And if you don't know how you want to be seen, then asking yourself, like taking some time to sit with yourself and reflect, how do I want to be seen? And this is kind of a tricky idea, because in our relationships, we might not be very used to asking simply to be seen in certain ways. We might, ask for gifts or ask for, favors or different things. But asking, will you see me as, this, or will you see me as that? That's a kind of a different thing. And since so much of Leo is about being seen, and so much of Venus that I reflect on lately in the more kind of erotic areas of my work, and also in just embodied creative practice, is being able to ask for things and to say yes and say no. So I think that's that would be a good practice to do, is asking to be seen in certain ways, or asking yourself, how do I actually want to be seen right now? Yeah, I had other thoughts too, but I forgot. Maybe they'll come back to me. Yeah.
And so as Venus makes its journey back, it's already made contact with Jupiter and Uranus by square. It's gonna do it again when it retrogrades. And yeah, I was wondering what you all thought, because I think the Jupiter and Uranus squares to Venus during her time are so really, really changed. It makes it a not usual, Venus retrograde through Leo. And I was wondering what y'all had to say about that. Uranus and Jupiter. Renee?
Um, yeah, I was just writing about this over the last few days, and I feel that as a person that dwells pretty steadily on the fixed cross, I'm actually a double Leo sun ascendant and Taurus moon.
Whoa.
Um,
Yeah.
and I have a 15-degree moon, so my moon is really getting the aspects of Uranus and Jupiter in the last year. Um, and what Nate was saying, this aspect of how does one want to be seen, um, I think involves a willingness to evolve, and the way that we want to be seen, and the ways that we want to feel ourselves or be loved or receive affection or express beauty, all Venusian themes. And then Leo as a sign of self-actualization, um, I think requires an evolutionary momentum. We don't stay the same. And evolution takes time, and time in the human realm means residue and iteration. And, you know, if we're trying to do anything in our lives, there needs to be some kind of capacity for commitment. And then there are periods of time when what we've been committed to and the ways that we've been working are ready for change. And it might be ready in a glorious kind of evolutionary feeling of, okay, I'm feeling all this momentum to move into the next chapter. Or it could be disruptive in a sense of this really doesn't fit me anymore, in a sense of frustration and needing to push back at what we have built for ourselves. So I feel that on a personal level. And then I think on a transpersonal level, because Uranus is here representing the collective. Yeah, the last week, as we've headed into Leo season, has been a week where some of the hottest temperatures ever have been recorded. And there's just really kind of amplification of the crisis moment that we're in here on Earth that has to do with so many things and so much momentum of historical action and inaction. And that this is a period of time in which, you know, we are kind of collectively and individually being asked to look into our hearts and refine what it is that we're wanting to express outwardly through our solar, like diurnal doing energy, so that we can participate with the evolution of Earth and where Earth is going.
All right. Yeah. I'm here for all of that. Any thoughts, Nate? Jupiter, Uranus.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. I love that. And yeah, I was also reflecting before we were getting on this call about the self in movement, right? Because similarly, I have a lot of fixed cross energies, Renee, and the fixed, yeah, right. Yes, the fixed fixed cross is interesting because it's like it can tend to, I had this image of, you know, somebody wanting to, the parts of ourselves that want to stick to this one kind of direction of building ourselves. Or, you know, I've got 3 planets in Taurus, so it's like the builder of the zodiac, right? Stick to this one kind of motion of building, or one channel or diversion or direction, or this one kind of sound loop. You know, you play the part of the song you like over and over again, that sort of thing, over and over and over and over again, where ourselves, our psyches, I think of what one of the founders of archetypal psychology, Rafael Lopez Pedraza, said: this is a psychology that's based on psychic movement. Either we move psychically or we stagnate. It's not quite either or, I don't think, but still there's this, that our psyches actually want to be in movement, ourselves want to be in movement. So there's this pulse of life, of creativity, of vital force that we're all connected to, but there's also that wants to shake up, that wants to move, that wants to go in different directions. And sometimes its light is like here, sometimes its light is over to that side, you know. And so what is it, an image that keeps recurring to me is sort of this idea of what does it mean to point myself toward the light in this time, versus it might be different from how it was a year ago or a month ago. Another thing is I'm always kind of trying to keep track of repetitions or mini synchronicities that come up. And one of the things that I've noticed coming up again and again this week is the word utopia, for whatever reason. You know, there's I've heard people, I saw somebody, a coworker, you know, reading a book called Utopias. I've seen it on social media a few different times. I've heard it in conversations here and there. And so I started to look up the etymology. What does utopia actually mean? Well, interestingly, it kind of means no place, like nowhere, actually. But then the you part of utopia also connects with the word that was the root of vital force, or like this kind of eternal, abiding vital force. So it means both nowhere, no place, and also the place of eternal vital force. And I think that connects with Uranus and Jupiter and this sort of Venus retrograde square to Uranus, right? It's so there's this kind of trickster like holding both sides of that coin of like what does utopia mean to us? What is the place within myself that is abiding and eternal, but that is also not this permanently sort of lodged or stagnant place, but that is able to be, as we were talking about earlier in the show, Cory, like being able to be shaken up and diverted into these different directions. It doesn't mean that it's fragmentary in a pathologized sense. It means that these different perspectives of ourselves and of our ecologies and our collaborative kinship can be held, and that we can hold them. So that's what I would say.
Wow. Wow. These are stunning answers, and I wish we had like another hour. I mean, we could totally use another hour to like dive into this, but I'm wondering if either of you in about a minute or so has anything to say about Venus's transition from evening star to morning star when she crosses the sun during that Kazemi on August 13th. Anything to say about evening star, morning star Venus in general, or this particular one?
Well, some of the meaning historically or traditionally is that in the evening star phase, she's a lover, and in the morning star phase, she's a fighter. And the Mayan cosmology that was in many ways based on the Venus cycles saw the Heliacal rising as a time of commencement or onset of war. And with what Nate was just sharing, I was just thinking of the degrees that Venus is traversing and the late Leo back to the mid Leo of this need to kind of shake things up and reclaim a natural spontaneity and joy, and really fight against something that has stagnated and kind of, yeah, maybe the warrior spirit in a creative sense.
Wonderful. I'm seeing that all over the place and feeling that already. I think it's going to be a really interesting summer. Thank you both so much. That went by so fast. And again, in one minute or so, Renee, do you have anything coming up that you would like to share? Any projects or anything like that?
Yeah, Embodied Astrology is a collective project, and we have programming throughout the year. There's a really incredible, very diverse group of facilitators who bring astrology into conversation with other modalities. And I teach every Monday on Zoom in a class called Somatic Space. If people want to check out the synthesis of somatic or embodied work in astrology that I do, that's from 8 to 9:30, and it's drop-in by donation on Zoom.
Terrific. And we'll have Renee's and Embodied Astrology's info up in all of our show notes. And then, Nate, real quick, you got anything going on? Like 30 seconds?
Sure, yeah. Well, first, highly recommend Renee's offerings. I went to the workshop on Vesta and Kink last fall. It was wonderful, and I'm working on a project right now on Pluto and Kink. It's a performance project, but but in terms of my sort of more educational offerings, yeah, I have a monthly practice group, study practice group called Weird Astro Bodies, which puts together chart investigation and the themes of the month, and we put it into the body and voice and total weirdness. And I'm also I have an offering that's going to be coming up both in Providence and New York.
Play it out, Nate.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Ecosexuality and astro-erotics. Yeah, I'll have more info about that soon.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you all next time.